Hands up if you can hear me. Okay, Baran, good, thank you. Ruby, okay. Robert, okay, thank you. Sandy, thank you. Okay. Right, guys. So welcome. My name's Rayan Alam. I'll be hosting this session here this evening, which is on exam prep. I've been doing this for being a tutor and a lecturer for many years at UNISA also. I just want to confirm with you before we go forward. How is the sound quality? Can you all hear me clearly? Okay, that's a very positive thing there. Someone at least hears me very clearly, because sound is always an issue. Okay, so I'll assume that you can all hear me clearly. And what we're going to be doing this evening is to go over a past paper. Thank you. Thank you for telling me that the sound is fine. If you do have trouble with the sound, and then you please let me know, okay, by putting up your hand and or just texting here in the text box. All right. So what I'm going to do this evening is I'm going to go through a past paper or a concept exam paper, and then we'll talk about possible answers to it, and then also you are free here, guys, to ask questions. Okay, you can put your hand down, Barent. Barent, if you're not asking a question, you can put your hand down. But if you want to ask a question, you raise your hand. And if for some reason you're not getting my attention, you can just speak up. But that's how it's gonna go. Okay. So for this evening's session, like I mentioned, I'm going to share my screen with you in a moment. Okay. Can you all see that? Can you all see the screen that I've shared with you there now? It's important. Please put up your hand if you can. Okay, Shannon sees it. Crystal. Jacques sees it. Thank you, Jacques. Hi, Jacques. Okay, Gerard, that's cool. The others, they must please indicate whether they can see this. Okay. All right. Number of people are not indicating that they can see this, let alone if they can actually hear me, I hope. Okay. Fine. That's okay. It's fine. Put your hands down. I'm going to proceed now. I'll make this a little bit bigger. So this comes from your tutorial letters. We haven't had sessions before on 2601 this semester, but these facilitation sessions now, so we'll probably have them as many as we can before you write your exam. Now, am I correct that the exam is being written on the 30th of this month, 30th of November? The 26th, eh? So, okay, let's try and get as many sessions as we can in before then, all right? As many sessions as possible. And also people can, if they have difficulty with certain parts of the work, also can have one-on-one sessions with me. That is not possible. All you need to do is to send me a request. I hope Jacques, or okay, Adele isn't here this evening, but if Jacques knows about the link that's available, where you can, in addition to these sessions, also ask for a one-on-one session, and I can spend some time with you on an issue in the subject where you are having difficulty or you require further help, and I can try and assist you as far as I can. All right. Ruby Lee says, yes, please. Well, yes. Not enough people are taking advantage of the service. Well, you're doing that, it assumes you've mastered the subject, I believe. You have no trouble understanding these very simple company law, corporate law concepts, and are able to, apply them to everyday practical situations. First, it's good to know. But if not, it was welcome to request a session. Right. I'm getting a noise. Okay, is that you? Does somebody want to ask a question? I'm just getting a noise here, like a sound. Could be that your mic is on or your camera is on. So perhaps what we could do is keep cameras and mics off, and then you speak when you want to, you need to speak. Okay, so we move on today, guys, with question 1. Okay, I just can't see my. Sandy's asking, will we be able to access the recording for later use? For the other subjects that I've been facilitating on, that was possible. But Jacques, will it be possible? Do you know whether students will be able to access these sessions later, these recordings? Okay, I'm not getting an indication there, so I'm not sure, okay? Perhaps Jacques, as you know, we can ask him again whether this session is being recorded, okay? As I can see that it's being recorded now, but whether you'll be able to access it, I can't say for sure. Okay, guys, let's move on with the work this evening now. Going through a past concept paper, with the intention for the remaining sessions in these sessions to be going through past papers. So, okay, question 1, section A. I may just, before we get into it, give you some tips on how to actually, approach and to prepare for these exams. You'll notice that the exam is a 2-hour paper, okay? Can you imagine when I did these subjects decades ago, it was a 3-hour paper, okay? And the question paper was very short. The questions were short in the sense that the question paper was short, but the questions themselves were like 20 marks, 25 marks, 10 marks was your shortest question. Now the questions are far shorter. It's out of 100, so you need to write a lot. Okay, so you only have 2 hours for which to write a lot. So I would suggest to you that when you are given the paper, and okay, is this going to be written online as well, or is this going to be a take-home test, or how are you going to be assessed with this? Are you going to be writing on campus or something? It's online, eh? Okay. So then, either way, I would suggest then that even the little time is at the 24-hour period where you have to log in and then have the response, your reply back within 24 hours. Okay. So even so, guys, you would start off, to be well advised, actually, even though it's a take-home test and you have all this time to find out, the answers, that when you go through a question paper, always mark off, once you've read it, mark off those things that you know the answers to already. Okay, it may not be in sequence. So you first start to go to those things where you know the answers to, and you leave those things that you do not know the answers to, when only know part of the answers to, in a certain order. You leave that for later. Okay. So that will be saving you a lot of time under normal conditions, even when you take it home, it will help. So question 1. Sarah wishes to incorporate a company to raise funds for wildlife conservation. advise her on the following. Okay, so she wants to incorporate a company to raise funds for wildlife conservation. So considering the purpose of the business, indicate the type of company she should register. Right, you must indicate that. And then also mention 4 distinctive characteristics that are associated with this type of company. Right, guys, what do you think this is? What kind of company are we talking about here? Okay, so in your textbook and in your study guides, this forms under types. This falls under the subheading of types of companies. You know, the Companies Act speaks of 2 types of companies. You know, it classifies as various kinds of companies, but initially you get 2. What are those 2? What kinds of companies? There are 2 basic companies, and then it's further classified. Well, a non-profit company, yes, Baran, and a profit company. Those are 2 broad classifications. And within the profit company, you then get different kinds of companies. Not so. Under the profit company, you get the private company, the public company, the state-owned company, you know, that kind of thing. And on the other division, you get the non-profit company, and that is what we're talking about in this question. So it's an NPC, all right? A non-profit company. Under the old Companies Act, it was called the Section 21 company. But under the new Act, we refer to it as a non-profit company. Okay. So what is the 4 characteristics? How is a non-profit company different to the profit company? And the question asks you, so the first thing, you're getting 1 mark there for identifying it as a non-profit company, NPC. Now, how is that different? A normal profit company, whether that profit company is a public company, a private company, state-owned enterprise, but there's certain fundamentals, right? So this is what you're going to have to mention here, okay? You're going to have to mention that what makes it distinct is that it has as its objectives, in its MOI, in its Memorandum of Incorporation, all companies must have MOIs, but in this MOI, one of the objectives are that company must have, its objective must be either the promotion of a number of things, and you mentioned it there. But social activities is a bit broad. You must speak of, firstly, here that it must promote either things like culture, religion, sport, you know, activities such as that, whose main objective is not the purpose of making profit. Okay, so that must be the objective, one of it. One of those must fit into there. What else must the objectives contain? So far, we've mentioned 2. It must have a purpose. Its purpose must be, let's say, sport. It mustn't be there to make profit. And there's another, or a few other things that the objectives must contain in its MOI. It must regulate what will happen to it and to its assets in the event that it is liquidated or it is wound up. Right? That is one of the things. In a profit company, what happens when the company goes into liquidation? In a profit company, if it goes into liquidation or deregisters, what happens to the assets of the company now? Who has the rights to those assets in a normal profit company? It has to be divided up amongst the creditors. Okay, and then we have to look at our insolvency law and see, okay, who are the people that the company owed money to? And depending on where they rank, they will be paid out from the assets of the company when it gets liquidated, including the shareholders. Right? And the shareholders are not always primary creditors or secured creditors. So after all debts have been paid, then the creditors will be considered to be amongst those groups. But in a non-profit company, the assets of the the non-profit company, must it also be divided amongst the board there, the directors of the non-profit company? It's a very quiet crowd here, guys. Nobody wants to speak. Okay, Baron says no. Okay, so then what must happen to it? What must happen to the assets? So they must be very clearly stated in the MOI of the non-profit company that when it decides to dissolve or to be, go into liquidation, or not to operate anymore, then the assets cannot be divided amongst any of the directors or anybody that's got the interest in it, but must rather be transferred to another organization that has similar objectives. Yes. Okay. Charity bar, and you must give it to another charity. Okay, or a similar charity, whatever the case may be. If, for example, a very big religious organization, a church, has got many bodies or many organizations that sub-organizations that are under its auspices, then it can, and it's registered as a non-profit company, then those assets must return to the parent body, the parent organization. Okay. Now, what is someone mentioned the PBO? What is a public benefit? Okay. Can someone just put the mute the mics for me? Thank you. So what is a PBO and how is it different to the NPC now?
I wrote a song about why beer is better.
Yeah, what is PBO? Someone mentioned that what has that got to do with this, with the non-profit companies? Public benefit organization, that's what it stands for, and that has got the indirect connection to non-profit companies. It is basically a tax benefit. Okay, so once an organization, which would be a non-profit company or an NPO, that's very different, not very different, but it's different in terms of registration and requirements. Okay, that they, in addition to that, they can also register as PBOs, public benefit organizations. So if they are successful with that, they need to make an application to South African Revenue Services and they can get the status. And if they get the status, then their income that it acquires will not be taxed, or if it is taxed, it is taxed at a much reduced level. Okay, so there's a lot of benefits with an NPC, but of course an NPC must be careful that it sticks to its objectives. Here's a question for you. Can an NPC make profit? Although the objectives is not to make profit, what happens if it makes profit? Is it now, what are the consequences now? So you've got a church and the church, has a big raffle and makes a lot of money. It's made a profit and it has these raffles every 3 months and it's bringing in some income now. Expenses, and there's a profit showing. Say again, who was that?
It's Gerard, surplus.
Gerard, yes, please go ahead, Gerard. Yes, what were you saying?
I think it's referred to as a surplus.
Yes, in which event, what becomes, so if you do that, now what? I mean, where does that leave the NPC now? Right? It doesn't mean a public benefit organization or, a non-profit company if it makes profit, it's nothing wrong with that, but it must always use those profits. Where must it use that surplus and that profits? It must use it again to further its objectives. Once it starts using those surpluses and profits or other sources of income to, promote other objectives that are not in line with its objectives as stated in its memorandum of incorporation, then it becomes a different type of situation. There's other consequences now, especially tax consequences. They lose that public benefit organization status. Okay. We sometimes see organizations, I'll give you this now, a sports club, right? If you start a rugby club or a tennis club or a soccer club, whatever club, you start it with intentions of not to make money really, but and its main objective would be not to promote the sport of soccer or cricket or rugby, whatever the case may be, and it could be making a profit. But now let's look at an organization such as Manchester United Football Club, or here even South Africa, our local clubs, Kaizer Chiefs or Orlando Pirates. Their objective is to promote. It's a soccer club, it calls itself. But with these clubs, really, we have the objective as to be to promote soccer and also not make profit at the same time. Could they also be considered truly public benefit organizations? All right, so these are the kinds of questions that we need to think of. As long as the objectives are truly, being realized, then the company could stay within that definition. Although how money is spent and what they do can make one think otherwise. All right. Any further questions on that before we move on to the next one? Okay, no. Briefly explain the procedure. It's now 1.2, so that was 5 marks. You'll have to identify what kind of company it is, and you have to basically mention those things that are associated. We've done that. Briefly explain the procedure that SARA must follow to register the above company. What must she do to register NPC? Now, has anybody got any idea? There's the old way of doing things and there's the modern way of doing things. Yes, you fill out the NOI, a notice of incorporation, and you need to adopt afterwards what basically? Company law has gone through so many changes. The Act wants people or companies rather to self-regulate. There is regulations as well. There's annexures that are attached to the Act that spell out and give you guidelines as to how you must go about and the forms you must fill in to complete the registration of a non-profit company. Okay, so between sections 14, 15, and 16, there's procedures of the Companies Act read together with the regulations. And one will then complete the correct form and make sure that the correct forms, and then adopt a particular MOI. And there's an MOI that is basically, one must, you can adopt your own MOI or you can adopt the standard one. And if you adopt the standard one, it must be amended. So as long as the objectives, as stated in sections 15 and 16 of the Act, as it relates to non-profit companies, are clearly set out. Okay. So you can't have an MOI there where the objectives are stated as making, profits, the right of votes and majority and minority rules and things like that. It will have to be quite clear that it's amongst those objectives that we spoke of before in 1.1, and also that making very clear what will become of the assets of the company upon the liquidation, the deregistration of that company. But it's a simple process in reality. one can go to SIPS, the website. Who's been to the website of SIPS? When I say SIPS, I don't mean like this. I don't mean SIPS like that. I mean this. Right? Which is, what does that stand for, by the way? You can tell me what that stands for. Okay, that's the Company's Intellectual Property Commission. That's the acronym for it. It used to be called CIPRO, Company's Intellectual Property Registration Office, under the old act, but it's now been called SIPS. People call it SIPS. So everything has now been made so easy. You can register as a user, you can download forms, you pay, open up an account, and you can register a thing like this online within a few weeks or less. As long as you make sure you're complying with the provisions of the Act. But what you need to comply with is what I've mentioned there now. We're able to incorporate such a thing. Now, for an NPC, a non-profit company, there are certain other restrictions. Does every company have to have a director, whether it's a profit company or a non-profit company? Right, that is that shouldn't be. That's like a rhetorical question, because of course no company can exist without a director. Companies are corporate entities. All right, they are in one way a type of fiction, but they are recognized, but they cannot act by themselves. And only nominated and duly nominated, elected, and appointed directors of this company may act for the company. It's when they act in a capacity that the company is acting. So what I'm getting at, guys, is the number of directors for an NPC. Is there any limit on the number of directors that the minimum number of directors that an NPC may have?
Must have 3.
3, right. A private company, at least 1. Public company also is a minimum of at least 3. So NPC must have 3. There's no share capital invested as such, right? Because this is not the purpose of it. There's an executive body, governing body. We commonly see that in organizations, non-profit organizations, executive committees or parties that are given powers, and their powers are regulated in the MOI, and all the powers that they are given must be in line with proper corporate governance as well. Right, we're going to come to that in the further part of the question now. Any further questions on this? Guys, don't let me do all the talking. If you don't understand anything or you wish to add something or make a comment, you're most welcome. Point 3 now, that was for 5 marks. Sarah has heard that all companies should appoint company secretaries. Indicate whether this is correct. Also inform Sarah of 3 statutory duties of a company secretary. Very interesting question, guys. They only ask you for 5 marks. It could be a 25-mark question as well. So let us deal with the first thing, the first part of the question. She has heard, Sarah has heard, that all companies should appoint company secretaries. Is this true or not?
It's not true. It's not true for NPCs. It's voluntary.
Right. So now the company secretary, we must say now, you must pick what the questioner wants you to see from you is that you must know which types of companies are obliged to have one and which companies are not obliged. And as you rightly said there, a private company, or not a private company, an NPC is not obliged to appoint a company secretary. This official was introduced, was even under the old act, they introduced the company secretary. under the new Act, the 2008 Act, they now clearly set it out and, gave the powers even more clearly, what the role of the company, who the company secretary is and the role of the company secretary. So a public company or public secretary or company secretary, beg your pardon, must be appointed for all listed public companies and all public listed companies, and also certain private companies who have a certain PI score, public interest score. This relates to the amount of turnover they have and the amount of people they employ. Okay, but by law, listed companies on the JSE and also public companies that are not listed must have a company secretary, and it is advisable to have such an organ, to have such an official. Now, why? The question is delving a bit deeper. Why? Of what importance is the company secretary? Why is it good? So you said it's voluntary. Yes. So if you are able to do it, does it make sense then to have a company secretary, even though you're not required to have one? What's the advantages and disadvantages of that? What would you tell Sarah in such a case? You told her now that, no, Sarah, you don't need a company secretary, really. It's by law, you're not required to have one. So don't even think of it, What did you tell her? Like, what would be the reasoning behind this?
Well, a company secretary can advise on all legal matters.
Okay. Is that only duty of the company secretary?
No. Must ensure that board meetings are done in accordance with procedure and that proper minutes are kept.
Hmm?
And of course,
Yes.
the most important is the financial statements that must be certified.
Yes. So, the appointment of company secretaries, in public companies and large private companies is a move towards, better corporate governance. And this week, the companies the world over could see, judging from all the corporate scandals in the world, how things have been messed up and how, governing bodies and boards of directors basically swindled companies and stole monies and did things that were fraudulent, that they had to have a real look at the entire thing. Now, just look at the company secretary function quickly, because we're killing two birds with one stone here. We're answering the exam question, a possible exam question, and also we're learning and talking about this function. Before the coming of the company secretary in the early 2000s, there was no such person. Lawyers would always be hired by companies, and it was always important to have advice, someone to advise them and to guide them. But it became a requirement, and the duties that they gave to company secretaries were twofold. They had a large and big and important accounting function, and a big and important and large legal function. And as you have said there, the accounting function was enormous. The company secretary would be responsible for signing off the annual financial statements of the company, on the one hand. Okay, it had this important duty. Now, who would want to put their name to that and to basically give assurance that the financial statements of the company are in order and sign them off and take responsibility for the accuracy and the correctness, right? Would be an accountant, or someone who's has deep knowledge about that. If you thought that was easy, the other side of the company secretary's duty is the legal function. And what you mentioned there is true, sir, that the company secretary is obliged to make the company aware of all law. Now, that is a major responsibility to place on somebody, to make the company aware of all law. The word all is used, all law that is affecting the company. So take a second to think about what laws could affect a company. What laws now? Just give me like what you can think of. You start a company, or you in charge of a big company, how many legal issues are there not that will fix the company in various fields? Think about that. Give me an example.
Labor Relations Act.
Labor relations, look at that. You know how massive that is, how important that is. That is a large part. You know, labor, the workers and employees are large stakeholders in companies. That in itself takes up, you know, it's a major factor. What else? Labor matters.
Employment Equity Act.
Okay, employment equity, it falls under labor as a broad thing. But okay, let's just quickly look at labor. You know, the directors themselves are sometimes employed, right? Occupational safety falls under labor, you know, under employees, employee relations. Unfair dismissals, taxation, yes, that's one thing, yes. What else? Company and corporate law. I mean, the company secretary must advise the directors, both collectively and individually, about their fiduciary duties and their duties of care and skill. And environmental matters, of course. So the company must understand that it operates not in a vacuum, all right? At board level, right down to low-level employee, the company's got responsibilities. The company can get sued, damages claims. Within employee matters is medical matters, there's union matters, there's IT matters, there is various contractual matters. So I can go on and on here, guys. So to be responsible for all of that is not easy, right? The electoral matters, and that's such a broad field, yes, Ruby. So a company secretary is responsible for that, right? So this is in line with the new way that companies are going to operate. Okay? Corporate governance, ethical, proper leadership. And there must be somebody that must keep the directors. The directors are required to break up into certain factions in the sense that they are, you know, the executive directors, there is independent directors, directors watching directors, you know, not having an interest in the company, a financial interest in the company. So a company secretary fulfills this role. So what would you tell her? Would you tell her that, oh, what is the question say now? Who is this person? Sarah, forget it. Don't employ such a person. What did you tell her?
No, given the advantages of a company secretary and the importance of the role, I'd advise her to seriously consider point one.
Good advice. Good advice. Good advice. You obviously, she would say, well, you know, and why would that be? Because this is part of why, you know, this is the buzzword going on in company law at the moment. Okay? The debate about the stakeholder, the shareholder eccentric approach versus the pluralistic stakeholder approach. Company law is you know, created and drafted on the premise that the company has been created to make a profit, and therefore it must serve those who are entitled to those profits, shareholders primarily. And only later on, sort of as a bythought, to consider the other stakeholders in the company, which are the employees, the creditors of the company, the customers of the company, the environment, the government, you know, which are also valuable stakeholders, and that the company shouldn't operate, especially if it is a public company. Now, if Sarah is going to, as a shareholder, I'm not as a shareholder, but as an NPC, going to, you know, start this company, and where will she be getting funding from as a non-profit company? Where is she going to be looking for money to raise? Because non-profit to profit, you still need money. So where is she going to get? She's hoping to get donations from the public, right? So she wants to be seen as the company, portray the company as a good corporate citizen, right? And wants to be, to show that this organization that she's going to form is going to be a responsible corporate citizen who takes into account all these things that I've mentioned. And having a company secretary is already a good indication that the company, you know, has got somebody that's responsible on their side. right? Because there's legal obligations not only on the directors but on the company secretary. And there has to be somebody who's responsible, who has either an accounting knowledge, a deep accounting knowledge, or a deep legal knowledge, is able to help them. Okay. Because who do you think now, guys, would be suitable to be a company secretary? What kind of profession? Now that I've said that, would you hire? If you were to hire companies, would you hire now? If you were asked by Sarah to hire a company secretary, where would you find one? Who would be ideal candidates for this position?
Either a chartered accountant or a lawyer.
There you go. Well said. In fact, if you look at any job, the company secretaries, this is exactly what they see. Okay. They want either a chartered accountant or attorney or an advocate who's got relevant experience. So, yes. Now, to become a chartered accountant or an attorney or an advocate requires, yes, Mr. Kwakwa. Yes, sir. You have your hand raised. You want to ask a question? If not, can you hear me, sir? Okay. Perhaps that the hand is up by mistake. So as I was saying now, that to become a member as a chartered accountant or an attorney or an advocate, it requires being the member of a recognized profession, right? And to have some integrity and some knowledge on these subjects. Although if you watch the Zondo Commission, you maybe think otherwise, that former representatives of SAA, chartered accountants, bring the entire profession into disrepute. But my point is that, to become a company secretary, considering what they're required to do, that you have to be a member of a profession. But to become a director of a company, what is the academic requirements to become one? Anybody? What is the minimum requirements? Pardon?
There's no requirements.
There you go. You see? That is just the one of the problem. There's no requirement that you have to, have a matric. You can basically be illiterate and be a murderer, technically speaking, and be a director of a company. There'd be nothing there to stop you. Although that's not desirable, but it will still not be something that will disqualify you. There are other things that may disqualify you. But those things there, you are still eligible. So because of that difficulty, that there's no legal requirement in terms of qualification, academic qualification to be a director, there has to be somebody that does have that necessary experience and knowledge to be able to guide, and therefore the company secretary came into being. Okay, to assist directors in their duties. Because directors, whether you're educated or not, experienced or not, once you accept the position, then what happens? Once you consent to be a director, what happens to you now? Is there any responsibilities that you need to carry as a director once you've accepted and consented to be one?
Yes, you've got fiduciary responsibilities.
Right. Yes, fiduciary duties attached to you, as well as what is the other big responsibility? You got many responsibilities, but now from our common law we know, and now being truly fleshed out in detail in the new act, the duties are they are now it's an attempt at codifying something that was not really codified. So it's partially set out now in detail, the duties of the director. And the director has got two major duties. The one, as you've identified, is the duty, and the other is the duty of care and skill. Further questions tonight, we'll go into that. So hence the company secretary comes up because directors may be short, but now there will be no excuse if the company secretary can show that, he has advised the company and has advised the directors. They are duty bound to do that both on a collective level. In other words, the board must together, she must advise them, or individually, where they see that they are not, or they're off track or they're not complying with what's required. Any further questions, guys, on that? So we've mentioned more than 5 duties there, right? Of these statutory duties. So all you need to know to always make sure you get good points here. Remember that this company secretary has got financial, accounting responsibilities, financial responsibilities, and legal responsibilities. So under all of that, you can now mention at least 2, then you'll get 4 marks. Or if you mention 3 on both sides. So for the financial responsibility, the accounting responsibility, they must sign off all financials. They must ensure that there's a proper process in place. From the legal point of view, they must advise the company on all law affecting them. The directors, they must advise about their duties collectively and individually. They must also keep records of minutes and notes of minutes and make sure that the resolutions are properly drafted and kept. Okay. And one last parting shot on this, we're going to talk too much on this, that the company, in public companies where they are required to be appointed, right? Public companies as well as public listed companies, over and above the Companies Act, which this course is focused on, there are other things, right? So there's the King 4 report. Who's heard of the King 4 report or the King reports on corporate governance? Okay. Which also lays down certain requirements, and the King 4 report is something that all public companies that are listed must follow. If they're not listed, then they don't have to they're not obliged, and in the same position as SARA now, with a non-profit company. Okay, so the same advice could apply there as well. That you're not a public listed company, but being a public company, if you want this image and you want to be perceived as a good corporate citizen, banks will lend you money, creditors will give you credit, people will want to do business with you because they perceive you. So that's part of the corporate governance thing, where the company must, communicate to the outside world that it is open, that it is transparent, that it is legitimate, that it is ethical, and all these things. Okay, while driving, can we continue, guys? While driving to a party, Sarah notices an office building that is to let. Okay. She sees a building. She's interested in renting an office without further delay for purposes of her proposed company. Okay, so the company is not even registered yet. And remember, on the NOI and the MOI, NOI will contain certain formalities which include your registered address. So she doesn't have a registered address yet before she can fill in the NOI. So without further delay, advise Sarah of the formal requirements to conclude a binding contract on behalf of a company yet to be formed in terms of the Companies Act 71 of 2008. Now, before you give your answers, just a second, guys. I'm going to ask you again. Everybody can see the question that on my screen that I've shared, right? Okay. So I'm going to give you 2 to 3 minutes to look at that, and I'm going to come back and ask you. And I would like somebody who hasn't answered before to help out with an answer. Who's going to give us an answer here? Who would like to, in 2 or 3 minutes time? Okay. you're too shy to ask for it, I will ask you guys when I come back. 2 minutes, okay? We'll be back in 2 minutes. Okay, guys, I'm back. Yes. So what is this question about? She wants to know the requirements to conclude a binding contract on behalf of a company that is yet to be formed. What do we call this? What is this about?
Capacity.
Say again?
Capacity to represent the company.
Really, that's not a direct thing, sir. You partly correct, but this is more direct here. It's not actually the whole area. The pre-incorporation contract, yes. See, representation plays some small part in it, yes. But we're talking about pre-incorporation contracts. So what are pre-incorporation contracts then? She sees this premises to let. She wants to hire the premises, but the company is not formed yet. Now, is it possible that you can actually enter into a contract on behalf of a company that's not in existence? Can you enter into a contract on behalf of something that's not there? Can you, in essence, the legal question is, can you enter into a contract as an agent of a principle that is not in existence? Right? She's an agent of a principle which is yet to be formed, is not formed yet. Under the common law, no. Right? You can't represent something that's not there. Company only comes when does the company come into registration? When does the company come to registration? When does the company come into existence?
Upon registration.
Upon registration. So registration is a process, right? And once you've completed the NOI and the MOI and adapted it correctly and signed the necessary consents, make sure it's all correct and pay the proper fee, you submit it, and then if everything is fine and you comply, then they give you a certificate of registration. Okay? The old days, I'm talking of the old days, This used to be done manually. Things had to be lodged in Pretoria with the offices of CIPRO. But now everything's done over the internet electronically. Okay, and you automatically get registered. Your records get sent to, once it's approved, it gets sent to the revenue services. It's kept on record at SIPs, back to you. So it's automatic registration across all the required authorities. But this basically, this is a pre-incorporation contract, and you cannot normally enter into a contract. So this is an exception to the normal rule, basically. You cannot enter into a contract on behalf of a principal that's not there. But the Section 21 of the Companies Act says that you can actually do such a thing. It's possible, provided certain requirements are met. What are those requirements? Are you going to register this? What else? What must Sarah do now in such a case? Advise her now. What must she do now? You, the lawyer. Sarah wants to hire the place without delay. The company is not registered yet. What must she do? Okay, so there's a start. There must be a written contract. Okay, I can agree with that. So she must go with a lease agreement, or go to the landlord now. Tell the landlord, look, I want to enter into this contract. I want to lease this premises on behalf of this company that I'm going to register. Can you give me your lease contract? Okay, that's a step there, right? Is a contract in writing. Next step.
She must submit it to a board.
No, there's no board. The board of what? There's no company yet. There's no board yet. That only come into existence once it's registered. So we're sitting without the company. So there we go. So what is Ruby saying? Concluded by a person? Yes. The contract must basically say that Sarah is acting in her capacity as an agent of a company that is yet to be incorporated. The contract must clearly state that she's acting in that capacity. Right? So this is the second requirement of pre-incorporation contract. The party who's signing it or concluding it must say that, look, I'm acting in my capacity as the agent of a company that is yet to be incorporated. Right? That's the second step. Third step. So what happens now? They sign, if the landlord agrees, they sign that contract. But it's not registered yet. So what must Sarah go do now?
Isn't it the board has to rectify it within 3 months after incorporation?
Yes, that's what the contract must contain that now. So what happens now? Okay, that's what should happen. That is an intermediate period before incorporation now, before formal registration and incorporation. Okay, and during this period before incorporation, Sarah will be jointly and severally liable together with that company upon registration. Okay, so she will be held liable together with this company in the meantime. When the company, so this is what must be said in this contract also, that upon the registration, the company will, when it becomes once it's registered, it will then ratify the contract. It will accept the contract. But in the meantime, until then, Sarah will be liable together with the company. Okay, so she can be held liable until incorporation. Then after 3 months, up to 3 months, the company, once it is now registered, it must now ratify the contract in that sense. Okay, 3 months, it is up to 3 months to do it. Now, what happens if after 3 months the company still hasn't done it, still hasn't signed it in that capacity now as a company? the Section 21 says that after 3 months, the law says the company is deemed to have ratified it, deemed to have accepted. So whether it doesn't formally do it, or and ratifies it formally or officially, the law deems it so that it has been ratified. So the landlord will have that assurance now that the company, there is a valid contract in place with this company. All right. So those are the requirements. There must be a written contract. The contract must clearly say that the person is entering into this contract in the capacity as of a company that's going to be registered. The contract must state that it will ratify that contract, upon registration, and this must be submitted now. This contract must be submitted together with the registration to SIPS. Okay, must be submitted to SIPS, and then upon the registration, the company must ratify it within 3 months, or if it doesn't do it formally within 3 months, the law deems it so that it will automatically be ratified. It will become whether the company does it or not. Okay, but before registration, there's joint and several liability of that person who entered into that contract in their capacity as an agent of the company that is going to be. All right. So it is some protection for the landlord or for any company or anybody that enters into a pre-incorporation contract. Okay? This is a lease agreement, but I mean, what happens if it's a sale agreement where the company who's yet to be formed, if you want to you see a property you want to buy, but you know that if you already have 2 properties in your name, you don't want a third one. It's going to attract all kinds of attention to some party who has got interest against it. Will be prejudiced, or you don't want that to happen. So you can create a company. A pre-incorporation contract can be entered into. You can be acting in a capacity, acting in your capacity of as an agent of this company is going to be registered and purchase the company. So when the company then is registered afterwards, it will become the owner of the property and not you. Okay. As long as you, of course, are the director of the company. And the shareholder. Okay, any is this clear, guys? Everybody understand it? What the requirements are? There's about 4 or 5 of them. Yes, Parent.
Sorry, could you maybe explain or make it a bit clearer what happens that if the board rejects the contract after the 3 months in full or partly? I'm not really clear on that part.
All right. Okay, no problem. The law says this, Parent. It says that the company has those 3 months. The company must now, because it is said that it would ratify and sign the contract, it doesn't do it or refuses or whatever, then there's a deeming provision in Section 21 which says that whether they sign it or not, it will be considered as accepted by law. So there's no way out for that board or those directors afterwards. The company will be held liable within 3 months after registration and incorporation.
Sorry, but what if the board decides to reject, or it decides not to rectify the contract in full or in part?
The deeming provision goes against whatever they want to do to the contrary. So they can say that, they can do it when the company is sued and this point is raised. Section 1 will be a reply to that no, by law it's deemed that it's accepted, whether you signed it or not. I hope I'm clear there, Parent, that the idea is that whether the company now formally, if it rejects it or tries to reject it, it will be in vain because the law deems it that it will be accepted. There's a deeming provision that the company is accepted.
I get it now. Thank you.
You got it? So it's basically also, this is the risk here. Is that a risk that, okay, it's nice to enter into a pre-incorporation contract, but you're going to be bound by it. You're going to be bound in at the time that you sign, before the company is incorporated, you're going to be held jointly and severally liable. After incorporation, you've got no choice really, whether you delay the matter or not. After 3 months go past and you refuse or fail or neglect to sign, then the law says no, that is deemed to be a contract, a pre-incorporation contract, and you will be part of it. You'll be bound by it. Is that clear? Good. Now I have one more question, because this question has appeared in question papers for many years. I mean, I started teaching this subject in 2004, and I've seen how this very particular question comes in various ways. It's been asked in question papers and in assignments. And they often ask a question together with this. This is a nice little question. It can be asked very straightforward also. What are the requirements of a pre-incorporation contract? Or they could give it to you like this now, in the in this format of a problem question. Then they may also ask you this: what is the advantages of the disadvantages? They may ask a question like, Sarah doesn't want the business, or this is a non-profit company, but it could be with a profit company, and they may ask a question like, the parties don't want the terms of their contract to be made public, to be known to anybody. Advise them in this regard. Right? This pre-incorporation contract, the parties do not want it to be known, the terms of the contract to be known to be necessary, or parties that don't have to be privy to it. So advise them in this regard. So what do you think? What is there any significance about this? What has that got to do with anything? Let's say we added to the question this example of Sarah. Sarah doesn't want to know, or doesn't want the competing company or other people to know about the terms of the lease. Advise her in this regard. Any ideas, guys? Because there's one thing about, just think about this process now, guys. What are the requirements for the pre-incorporation contract? Once you sign it in that capacity, and it's used to writing and all that, then what did I say? One of the requirements is you must submit a copy of this contract to who? You must submit it along with all your other registration documents. The NIC, the Memorandum of Incorporation, MOI must be submitted along with. So once these things are submitted to SIPS, this contract also, what are the consequences now? What becomes of that? It becomes a public document. When you did registration of companies in your studies, I'm sure you guys have covered that. When you register a company, all those documents, they become public. That your registration documents. So when you completed the MOI, it will tell us a lot of things about the company. Who are the directors? what's the registration, the registered address of the company, what are the voting powers, the type of shares that they've issued, okay, the objectives of the company, what powers have been given to directors. Right? All these things are public, and that is normally public, but if you don't have a pre-incorporation contract, right, there's no other information that is there. So the pre-incorporation contract automatically become public as well. So it's going to be very hard people to make the private and not let the public know. If you want to find out details about a company that you're busy doing business with, all you need is the company registration number, and you can go on to SIPs, and if you paid the fee, you can obtain certain basic information, and even more than basic information about the company. Okay. Somebody comes to you and says, well, I'm a director of XYZ Limited. Okay, and he gives you the company, he gives you a card, a business card, or you see something on the public letterhead. How can you actually confirm that such a person is indeed what he says he is? Right? This is known as the doctrine of disclosure and constructive notice, remember? Where a company is already by virtue of its registration, which is public, is basically telling you certain things about itself, okay, in its registration documents. Any further questions on that, guys? No. Question 2. The Board of Directors of Bramley Pty Limited proposed that the general meeting should adopt a special resolution containing a general approval for the repurchase of shares. Okay. The company was incorporated using the standard MOI, with the provisions on company meetings as reflected in the Companies Act unaltered. Okay. On the 2nd of August 2018, the board gave notice of a shareholders meeting to be held on the 12th of August. 12th of August. How many days is that now? Bramley Limited has 13 shareholders. Only 2 people attended the meeting. Lynette, who is not a shareholder, attended as a proxy of Celia, who holds 15% of the votes, and as a proxy of Simon, who holds 5% of the votes. The only shareholder present in person was Beauty, who holds 5% of the votes. It was conducted by means of a poll. Lynette exercised the proxies of Celia and Simon in favor of the resolution. Beauty voted against the resolution. Okay, so now we're talking about company meetings. And this is not complex, guys. These are like relatively simple rules which you must understand. We're dealing here with a private company who is now wanting to adopt, the members or the shareholders want to adopt a special resolution. So you must understand the difference between special and ordinary. Okay, resolution. And they use the standard MOI. I told you the Act has got these annexes where you have standard MOIs. You're free to adopt the additional rules, company rules. You can adopt a standard MOI, or you can adopt an MOI with additions, alterations, and omissions. In other words, you alter and you tailor it, the standard MOI, according to your company needs. So here we told that they adapted the standard MOI, and the standard MOI would be in line with the basic minimums of the Companies Act. Okay, because the Companies Act is given broad discretion to companies. The new Act is given broad discretion for companies to self-regulate and to come up with their own rules. It basically gives out two-point principle. It says there are alterable provisions and unalterable provisions. You can change things, and some things you can't. Basic Conditions of Employment Act. Anybody familiar with that? You all LLB students, I take it. MRL2601 is an LLB course. So those of you who've done labor law, Basic Conditions of Employment Act contains the basic minimum of employment conditions that an employer and an employee can agree to. Right? So the employer cannot give an employee less than what is the law states. He can give you more, right? It regulates working time and working hours and working conditions to some extent. Maternity leave, for example, is 4 months for women. So you can give your employee 5 months if you like, okay? But you can't give him 3 months. So you can agree to the basic minimum and more. So the same applies here with the way MOIs are structured. Okay? The Act gives you the basic minimum, especially when it comes to rules regulating meetings and voting procedures, that if you don't agree otherwise, you can change it. You can have better but not less than what is stipulated to MOI. Okay? So now the first question they ask us, has the company complied with a notice period for convening the meeting? So basically, what is the minimum period allowed? They've adapted the standard MOI. What does the standard MOI say? For private companies now. What is the standard rule for private companies in terms of the MOI that hasn't been adopted? It's 10 business days, okay, in the case of private companies. So are we dealing with a private company or with a public company? Hello, is anybody there? Right, we're dealing with a private company. So this means if they've adopted the standard MOI, they must be given 10 business days notice. Okay. So that's the minimum amount of time. If it was a public company or a state-owned company or a listed company, 15 days for them. But the minimum for a private company is 10 business days before the date of the meeting. So let's just calculate here now. The meeting was held on the 2nd of August. They gave a notice, and on the 12th, the meeting was to be held on the 12th. Now, business days, guys, how is business days calculated? It's all days except weekends and public holidays. So yes, they're short here, basically. They haven't given proper notice. Right? 10 business days. We need to calculate that on here. And because they taken the standard, it's 10 days, and they could have altered the MOI. They're allowed to alter. This is an alterable provision, provided that it doesn't go less than 10 days. So what is your answer to 2.1.1? Has the company complied with the notice period for the convening of the meeting? You'll have to answer that and also explain why. It's 2 marks. Next question. Is there any further questions on that? Okay, must it be more than 10 days? No. What the Act is saying is, if it's a private company, you must give 10 business days notice. You can give more days if you want, but not less than 10 days, because 10 days is the minimum for private companies. For public companies, the minimum is 15 days. So in this particular example, if you count those days, are they short now or what are they? If I give you notice on the 2nd of August, so 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Right. Are those business days or are those, how are we going to calculate business days? Right. It would be all days except weekends and public holidays. So if you count that, it would be short. They just gave 10 straight days notice. So in that respect, it is not compliant. But what happens now, guys, if notice is short, it's not compliant to the act, but at the meeting, the people are there and everybody that is required to be there is there and they go on. Does that invalidate the notice? What is the status now?
I'll try and answer. I'm not sure if it's correct.
No, go ahead. That's the idea, Baron, that we're here
the,
to
if
we talk about
this,
this. Yes.
If 100% of the people if they have quorum and 100% of the people vote to continue with the meeting and rectify the decision, the meeting can continue.
Yes. It is possible, there's also a thing known as ratification. So meetings used to be big deals, and they still are big deals, of course, but formalities around meetings used to be big deals under the old act, and even the older acts were crazy. The 1926 Companies Act was, it's a different level. The 1973 Act gave a bit more leeway, and they amended it now. But this act makes meetings a lot more simpler, right? And it allows that people can attend meetings in various ways. They may not even have to be there in person. They can agree to so many things. So a thing such as important as a notice, if all parties agree and accept that, fine, there's a unanimous decision on it, that, fine, we haven't complied with the notice, but we're here now and we attend. And they make a decision, that doesn't automatically make the decision unlawful. Okay. So that principle applies to many aspects of meetings. Okay, the law seems to be giving preference to spirit above form. Okay, that if the idea is there, then it's possible that they can part with formalities. And of course, sometimes it's not always wise to even to do that in companies where there are contentious issues, or there are shareholders, or parties that have there's a close margin between minority and majority, that it perhaps not be wise to do business in that way, and that you rather stick to the formal requirements to prevent trouble that comes up. Okay. Now, quorum, guys. Tell me more about quorum. What is quorum? Baron, you mentioned quorum. What is quorum? In general terms, what is quorum? Let's start there. If you can understand that, because, you guys will know nowadays meetings are not only the preserve of companies. Meetings in all kinds of, organizations, is formality. What is a quorum?
It's the minimum amount of people that's required for the meeting to continue.
In one respect, yes, for the meeting to continue or for a certain decision to be made. Right? So, for example, in many non-profit companies, there could be many people at a particular meeting, but the people who have the correct interest and the correct shareholder interest, the percentage of their voting rights is the important. Those are the particular people that are there. So the meeting could go, but certain decisions can't be made because of a lack of a quorum. So what is the minimum at the shareholders meeting now for voting process like that? What's the quorum at least? The minimum amount in terms of the act. What's the percentage? 25, yes, Bharat. Okay, so at least in aggregate, it at least have 25% of all the voting rights must be there. Okay, and is this an alterable provision? In other words, can the company's MOI state that it can be less than that? Or even higher than that? See, so the Companies Act does in fact say that you can make this higher or lower. This is an example of an alterable provision. All right. So for 25%, if they have taken the standard MOI is 25%. Now, how many people are here that holds the right voting rights here now in the aggregate? Celia holds 15% of the votes. All right. Simon holds 5. That's 20. And Beauty is but she's holding a proxy, and Beauty holds 5%. So how much is that? That's 25%. So, but now it's only one person holding the proxy for 2 people, and only one person that is there now. Now we come to the question of proxies. What are the powers of, what are proxies? Okay, guys, our time is also up now. All right. Look, guys, just get back here. Right, so I hope that this session will continue with this kind of exercise. I'm going to try and find, if those of you who can find perhaps last year or the year before's exam paper, you can send it on. So it's here. And then we can perhaps, if there's enough time, we can go through all of that. Okay, so we have next week, and I don't know if we have the week after that, but we can perhaps, even have another class or another session before then. For those of you who are struggling with concepts and that, make use of the one-on-one session that is available to you guys. Okay. So continue with this question paper, and those of you who want me to go to last year's paper, send it on to me. I can work through it. Okay, thank you. Okay, guys, I shall hope to hear from you. Put in those requests if you want the assistance. You don't have to pay for it. It's free to you, student. So make use of it if you so require. Eh? Thank you and have a good evening. I'll see you next time. For those of you who want the early session, want a one-on-one session earlier. Thank you.